We are off, so I can still hear slightly the drone of Whitehorse behind us, but this is June the 21st, a solstice, so this is the longest day of the year. And I don't know what they're talking about because we're so far north, there's virtually no night to begin with. But we're pretty excited because this is the start of our 250 kilometer canoe trip down the Yukon. We're coming up to a set of double rows of pilings that they had built in 1899 to try to redirect the Yukon River for the steam paddlers. However, it didn't work so well. But at the time it was thought so important that they actually stationed, there was an RCMP post, and they had a Mountie stationed here to sort of guard it, but it went into disarray and the river went back to its natural course. We're entering Lake Labarge. It's huge. It's over 60 kilometers long. You're seeing about a third of it roughly. It's renowned for being really rough, or can get really rough, so they suggest you pick a side. We're picking the right side. And this is the lake made famous by Robert Service in his famous poem, The Cremation of Sam Magee. We've made it to the mouth of the Yukon River again, traversing the length of Lake Labarge. And the first day, we used a sail, it didn't work so well. The second day, however, our sail system, we did over 40 kilometers in about maybe a little under 5 hours. We surfed that thing. And so here we are, we're about to now pitch off again for Dawson City. Anyway, just for those that have been following our channel for the past 2.5 years, we've focused entirely on the 18th century, skills of the 18th century. So if you're looking at this video, those that have followed us are going, man, you're dressed in funny clothes. You've got normal things on, like boots instead of moccasins and shorts instead of a breech clout. But we just thought we're doing this trip, and typically we do a lot of trips with birch bark canoes we build, heading out from cabins that we've built, using traditional, everything traditional, but we opted to film this because, well, this is just too beautiful an area and trip not to film. So Cathy and I have been canoeing for all of our lives, and we've canoed thousands of miles, but we keep returning to this one. Well, at least this is our second trip, because of all our canoeing, this has the most beautiful scenery, in my humble opinion, of any place in Canada. And we're going to share that with you as we paddle down. It's going to get really fast now. We're in what they call the 30-mile stretch, and it's actually been designated as a heritage river. I'm going to take a little walk around and show you some of the artifacts in what was at the time of the gold rush known as Lower Labarge. And I'll show you some of the remnants that are left over. So if one ever gets the opportunity to paddle this, you're going to find all kinds of remnants of artifacts, and yeah, you don't want to take them. They need to stay here as long as possible. A lot of the structures are disintegrating and sort of falling back into earth. They're 125 years old now. But this was Lower Labarge, which was a town. So in the 1860s, a fellow by the name of Mike Labarge, whose the lake is named after, was putting a telegraph down the western side of this lake. And believe it or not, the intent was to take that telegraph all the way up to Alaska and then across the Bering Strait, so into Russia and Asia to get a European contact. And then they find out in 1866 they'd completed the transatlantic cable under the Atlantic Ocean, and all this was for naught. But the cable was brought across the river from the far side over to this site, which became the site of Lower Labarge. The SS Evelyn barge was a derelict, and they brought it up to use as a dock. There was an RCMP post here. And an interesting thing, in 1897, when the gold rush started, the Canadian government was petrified of a humanitarian catastrophe in the Dawson City area from starvation. So we had thousands, literally tens of thousands of people were migrating down this river to get to the gold in the Yukon, and there wasn't enough food. So in the winter of 1897, by dog sled over the frozen Lake Labarge, they brought 45,000 pounds of supplies. And it just baffles my brain to think of the logistics in the late 1800s for such a feat. And Lake Labarge is one of the last lakes in Canada almost to lose its ice. So the ice will go to the river, the upper and the lower rivers, long before the lake itself. And so by having that supply of food here, they were able to get an early start to get it up to Dawson to feed the people. And it's at that point that they implemented, when people were coming over the Chillicoot Pass, that everybody had to bring in 1 ton of supplies. 1,150 pounds of that had to be food, and it was weighed at the top of the Chillicoot and the White Pass. So pretty interesting history. Oh, while I'm on it, I'm an avid blacksmith. And if you followed our 18th century filming, this would have been a stand used by a blacksmith. Got a little turn screw here that would have loosened this, and this had a roller on it here. So he'd set that at a height for his anvil for a long, heavy piece of metal, or at his forge. If he was trying to heat the end of a long, heavy piece of metal, he'd use that as a stand. I also found what I believe is a wagon. And I suspect there's quite a few remnants of buildings, and I suspect this was taken down to the Lady Evelyn wharf down there, loaded up with their goods and towed up to their cabins to bring their supplies in. But everything was made here. Everything was, would have been a blacksmith shop here. They would have done repairs to the steamers and or the paddle boats that were plying the waters. Fascinating history. I'll put these guys back. So we're literally paddling through the major boreal forest of North America. So the band of boreal forest completely crosses Canada in the top end, just south of the Arctic, and crosses Russia. A huge carbon-eating machine. And fires, you think fires are a bad thing, but fires have played a part in nature since it started. But these forests are basically what you would have seen after the Ice Age. Nothing's changed. There was no commercial means of getting, or viable means of getting material out of this remote part of the world to mills. So you're just seeing a natural regeneration of, yeah, a very beautiful spot in Canada. And you notice too that the trees are all the same height. Well, that's an indication that there was a forest fire. So they'll actually grow at the same rate, just like somebody's taken a lawnmower to the top. So this wouldn't be that old a forest, maybe 60, 70 years since the last burn.
We are trucking.
As you can see, we take our bear protection rather serious. So Cathy and I, if we're canoeing in Ontario, flatwater canoeing, like if you think of places like Algonquin Park or Quetico, we don't carry this stuff with us because first of all, we're in black bear country, and second of all, we've got a lot of portages. So on these major Arctic rivers, there are no portages, or very few. So we're able to take things we wouldn't. This doesn't weigh that much. It has 6 D-cell batteries in it, and it'll last for about 3 months. And some people say it's kind of overkill, but we put this up around our camp, particularly in Boreal Forest, where we'll get into near the tree line. Tree is too short to even hang food. And if we want to fish or we'll go walking along the shore of a river or a lake, we have to leave our food protected somehow. And we have come back to camps, and we've had grizzlies come right up to this tape. Yeah, it isn't on, by the way. I'd be jumping. There's 8,000 volts here. And bears are very susceptible to it. So we've had grizzlies come right up to it. On 2 occasions, we've had a wolf come up to it on 1. And in all 3 occasions, none breached the fence. So that's one form of defense. Helps us sleep better at night. If we want to go fishing or exploring, we can, and hopefully our camp is still there when we get back. And next is bear spray. So we never go anywhere without this. We each have one in our pockets or in our packs, and we make sure that we've got ones that aren't expired. And the third and last would be a 12-gauge shotgun. So if you're going to carry a gun, and I strongly recommend it in the Northwest Territories or the Yukon, any place where you've got grizzlies, and we've done canoeing where we get into actual polar bear territory, a 12 or a 20-gauge shotgun just simply doesn't have enough energy. So we've never had to use this, and hopefully we never have to use it, but it is reassuring. Which reminds me of a story. We were camped up here in the north, way up in the north somewhere, and I was going off to dig a trench for a latrine, and I run into a native fellow that was restoring a building on this site. And he said, "You carry a shotgun?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Where is it?" I said, "In the camp." He goes, "Well, it ain't gonna do you any good there." And and he had one on his back. So that was the last time I went anywhere without this. So I'm gonna go fly fishing this evening, hopefully catch some Arctic grayling. This will be on my back. This will be in Cathy's pocket, and this will be ready for tonight, and I'll turn it on then. Yeah. So that's our bear protection when we're in the Arctic. Almost forgot to mention, we've already seen our first grizzly. So it was a young one. probably born last spring, maybe 14, 16-month, 18-month-old animal, something like that. And it was skedaddling away from us, so it was nice to see. It was nice to see it going in the right direction. There's a formula saying that risk is probability times consequences. So back to the gear we take, the probability of having a confrontation with a grizzly bear is really low. However, the consequences is really high. So if you apply that formula, this is good stuff to have with you. And I'm sure there's been hundreds or thousands of people that have gone down this river and carried nothing. And, you know, again, back to the probability, they didn't see a grizzly. But the consequences can be significant, and we do sleep better with this around us. So we're right at the confluence of the Teslon River and the Yukon. And the Yukon's about to get much bigger, much more powerful, because the Teslon is a bigger river. So the original native name for this was Hutalinkwa. And this would have been pre-European. This would have been a meeting spot for those indigenous people in this area. It would have been a trading area for them. During the gold rush of 1896, 97, 98, 99, it became a small community. The Northwest Mounted Police had a site here. There's a telegraph office here. And in the winter, they would bring up the steam paddlers, and they would pull some of them out of the water to do maintenance on them. Anyway, we're going to get bigger here. And it's, another thing, if you're thinking of doing the Yukon River, an alternative to the drudgery, if one might call it that, of Lake Labarge, would be to put it in at Johnson Landing on the Teslin, and that would bring you into the Yukon right at this point. I don't know what it's like. Cathy and I have never done it. I suspect it's spectacular, but it certainly can't be as spectacular as what they call the 30 mile, which is what we've just traversed. So, recommendation, I don't know the Teslin, but the Yukon behind us is absolutely spectacular. So don't ask me why, but for my American friends, we are going around the 4th of July bend. They call this on the Yukon River. So I tried to do some historical research on it, but I don't know where it came from. I'm suspecting some Americans that traversed this during the gold rush. For anybody who's contemplating canoeing the Yukon River, essentially it's an intermediate skill level river. There are no portages, but one skill you have to master is landing in very fast water. So the way Cathy and I do it, you have to find the site well ahead of it. Work your way to the side you need to be on. We do a side ferry and we slip into it facing upstream. So we're paddling the wrong way and we ferry into a safe landing as we've got here. And we'll try to show you in the morning when we pitch off how quick it's going to turn around and go the other way. Burr. So taking off, we always do it upstream. Cathy will do a draw on the right and we'll let the current bring the bow around, and it's really quick. 1, 2, 3, Cathy stays low till I'm in, and it's easy peasy, and just like that, we are off. So Cathy and I have pulled out to take a bit of a break at the village of Little Salmon. So the Little Salmon River is just to the south of us. There was a mission established here in the mid-1800s. It was a native village where Cathy's taking a walk out of respect. We're staying on the perimeter, but around the cemetery. And in the backdrop, you'll see their spirit houses. So quite a colorful history here. The Northwest Mounted Police are escorting a group of dignitarians north, and they ice forces them to pull ashore here. And they realize they're not going to make it that winter to Dawson, so they build a cabin, but the ice backs up, and the river rises 16 feet, wiping out their cabin. It wasn't rebuilt until 1898. They also had an Anglican church here. it was a full-time community for natives at that time until the big influenza of 1917, 1918 actually wiped out most of the community here.
Okay, we're making supper for tonight. We've got some ground meat. Oh, got some already. Some sauerkraut. A little bit of corn. Oh, let me put some onions in. And some rice. And we'll rehydrate that in the bottom of the canoe for the day. Spice it up tonight. Gourmet meal after a delicious breakfast of gooey porridge.
We are coming up to the village of Carmax, and we're going to go under one of the few places where you can actually cross the Yukon River. Yeah, this is the Klondike Highway running from Whitehorse to Dawson City. Interesting history with Carmax. It is an ancient ancestral gathering place for the indigenous peoples for hunting, fishing, trading. They would, a lot of the southern interior natives would come up here to trade with the more northern tribes. There's a very large flat plateau area here. Kind of fun to put one's mind back in that era, pre-European, and imagine the natives gathering here. Okay, it's about to get exciting here. We're coming into the Five Finger Rapids, which was created by 4 columns in the river. It narrows down, and you end up with 5 chutes down through it. The only safe way through is the right chute. So if you're canoeing this river, stay river right. There's going to be some big haystacks, so we're probably going to ship a little water. But that's it. They've back in the 20s when the steamers were coming up here, they had to winch themselves through it. So the government blasted out some of the dangerous rocks, but it's fast. It's quick. It's going to be over in a hurry. We got things lashed down, and yeah, it should be exciting. Should be coming up here any minute. Can you draw, Cathy? Power up. Some big haystacks out there. You get a little wet. Hey, we only got about 20 gallons of water. You okay? I'll bet you're wetter than I am. We got a lot of water in here. Ah, it's awesome. So this is McKays Roadhouse, or McKays Crossing, uh, built in the late 1800s in the height of the gold rush. It soon became known as the Yukon Crossing. So I'm going to take you down to the river and I'll show you where they in the winter they had an ice bridge across, and they used horses now because they've got some overland trails and they've cut a significant distance off of the travel time from Dawson City to Whitehorse and vice versa. But yeah, I can see the weary traveler coming in here. It was 2-story. This is sunk, of course, so this sill log where the ceiling would have been probably was about there. It's quickly deteriorating, but 2-story, there's 3 sections, so I'm thinking probably sleeping berths in the top where there'd be a wee bit more heat. They claim that it took literally hundreds of cord of wood to heat this structure and the stables in the winter to keep the men and the horses alive. It's just hard to imagine because winter up here, we're talking minus 30, minus 40, 2 or 3 hours of daylight maximum. Brutal. They were hardy people. So this is where the crossing actually was. So they would actually drag a boom across. I don't know how they did it, but they drag a boom across this river when it started to freeze up, and that would hasten the freeze up at this area. They'd strengthen it by putting brush on it and logs, and sometimes they'd even plank it. And then they'd take teams with sleds in the winter to get across to the other side and carry on the trail. In the summertime, they had a winch, and they would winch a barge across. And they even took advantage of the ice in, ice out in a period of time where they couldn't do either. They had a cable go across here, and passengers would get in a little basket, and they'd whiz them across the river. Now the cable was high enough that the steam paddle wheelers could actually get underneath it, so pretty amazing. So this part of the structure, we're at the stables here, and this part of the structure, I think, I had to make some assumptions, but it might have been living quarters for maybe the stable hands, people who tended the horses, perhaps tack room, you know, with all the harnesses and stuff. And typical of that, all these structures would have had a sod roof, and that's an actual surviving bit of a sod roof that they'd sort of put these planks down, they'd chink in between, put soil on, and they get vegetation growing on it. And then up here's the stable part. It's quite a large structure. My guess is they actually had to heat this for the horses as well. At that temperature, I don't think horses would thrive too well. So I suspect this structure was heated just like the roadhouse was heated. Anyway, it certainly is a step back in time. If you look up the long slope, you'll see just below the tree line a band of white, and that's volcanic ash. And that was a huge eruption around 750 AD, and it covered south central Yukon basically with a layer of volcanic ash, originating in the upper White River area, which we're heading towards at the moment, and it forced a sort of a mass exodus of the native people. They were pushed their population to the southwest and out of this particular area. The steamboat operators called it Sam McGees Ashes. We've had a fairly exciting morning. We saw our first doll shape. So they're what they call thin horn shape. So they got your doll and you got your rocky. Bit smaller than the bighorn sheep. We saw 2 groups of them, probably close to 30. It was senseless trying to film. I thought they were white rocks, and then Cathy goes, I think those rocks are moving. And we watched them running around. I think appeared like they had little ones maybe. So quite a bit of activity. But while I'm gazing up at the mountain at the side of it, almost run us into a shoal. So we quit looking for doll shape, and we stopped to brew up some coffee. Kind of a miserable wet day, but in scenery like this, you can't be unhappy. So we're stopping, we're going to brew some coffee, and there's a fresh moose track here. And we got our eyes open now because we're getting into the area with a lot of islands. The river's quite braided, and the moose like this kind of country. So we're hoping we're going to see our first moose here shortly. Now for coffee. So on my left is a classic example of regeneration after a forest fire. So this area was burnt in 1995. So we're looking at 28 years. This would be its 28th year of regeneration. So we got the willows and the tag alders all growing along the shoreline. A lot of poplars, and now we're starting to see some of the spruce come up through. We've made it to Fort Selkirk. Paddled through the rain all day yesterday. We got 270 kilometers to go and could probably do it in 4 days at the speed of the river, but we're probably going to take 5 or 6. We don't want it to end. We decided that there's so much history at this site that we thought if we tried to put it in this video of our trip down the river, it'd make it awfully long. So we're going to do a separate episode at a wee bit of a look, if you would, at the history of this fascinating place in the Yukon Territory. We've decided to camp tonight at the Salmon River. It's actually supported placer gold mining since 1898, and during the Klondike Gold Rush, it was short-lived, but it consisted of a Northwest Mounted Police post, a telegraph station, and a post office. And like many of them, later this settlement became a wood camp to provide fuel for the steam wheelers. But Cathy and I canoed this river 8 years ago, and boy, these buildings weren't in as much decay or decline as they are now.
So this is what 3 o'clock in the morning looks like. It was a horribly hot day yesterday. So we're trying for an early start.
We started out this morning at 3 o'clock, and it was quite cold. And now it's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so we've been paddling for close to 12 hours, and it's baking out there. So we found this little tributary, and we've tucked up in here. We're just kind of floating along and enjoying the shade that we can't get on the river proper. But anyway, we've got to start looking for a campsite because we're getting a wee bit tuckered.
No trip down the Yukon is complete without a poem by Robert Service. The Cremation of Sam Magee. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was a night on the marge of Lake Labarge when I cremated Sam Magee. Now, Sam Magee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the south to roam round the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell, though he'd often say in his homely way that he'd sooner live in hell. On a Christmas day, we were mushing our way over the Dawson Trail. Talk of your cold, through the parka's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. If our eyes we'd close and the lashes froze, till sometimes we couldn't see. It wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam Magee. And that very night, as we lay packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were fed and the stars overhead were dancing heel and toe, he turned to me. Cap, says he, I'll cash in this trip, I guess. And if I do, I'm asking that you won't refuse my last request. Well, he seemed so low that I couldn't say no. Then he says with a sort of a moan, it's a cursedest cold and it's got right hold. I'm chilled clean through to the bone. Yet 'tain't being dead, it's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains. So I want you to swear that foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains. Well, a pal's last need is a thing to heed, so I swore I would not fail. So we started on the streak of dawn, but God, he looked ghastly pale. He crouched on the sleigh and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee. And before nightfall, our corpse was all that was left of Sam Magee. There wasn't a breath in that land of death, and I hurried, horror-driven, with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, you may tax your brawn and brains, but you promised true, and it's up to you to cremate those last remains. Now, a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail has its own stern code. In the days to come, though my lips were dumb, in my heart how I cursed that load. In the long, long night, by the lone firelight, while the huskies round in a ring howled out their woes to the homeless snows, oh God, how I loathed that thing. And every day that quiet clay seemed to heavier and heavier grow. And on I went, though the dogs were spent and the grub was getting low. The trail was bad and I felt half mad, but I swore I would not give in. And I'd often sing to that hateful thing, and it hearkened with a grin. Till I came to the marge of Lake Labarge, and a derelict there lay. It was jammed in the ice, but I saw in a trice it was called the Alice May. I looked at it, and I thought a bit, and I looked at my frozen chum. Then here, said I with a sudden cry, is my crematorium. Some planks I tore from the cabin floor, and I lit the boiler fire. From coal I found that was lying round, and I heaped the fuel higher. The flames just soared, and the furnace roared, such a blaze you've seldom seen. And I burrowed a hole in the glowing coal, and I stuffed in Sam Magee. Then I made a hike, for I didn't like to hear him sizzle so. And the heavens scowled, and the huskies howled, and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, and I don't know why. And the greasy smoke in an inky cloak went squeaking down the sky. I do not know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out and they danced about, ere again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, I'll just take a peek inside. I guess he's cooked, and it's time I looked. Then the door I opened wide. And there sat Sam, looking cool and calm in the heart of the furnace roar, and he wore a smile you could see a mile, and he said, please close that door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you'll let in the cold and the storm. Since I left Plum Tree down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warm. Now, there are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold, and the Arctic trails have their secret tale that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night on the marge of Lake Labarge when I cremated Sam Magee.
It's a bit ironic that the Yukon River is the fourth longest river in North America, but it's so silty that we have to find sources of water that doesn't have as much silt that we were able to filter. So we're at the confluence of the White River and the Yukon, and you can see how braided it is and why it's going to be a little silty from here on in. Essentially, the last 100 kilometers that we've traversed of the Yukon has been braided like this, and Cathy's had to pick the best routes through the different islands and channels. So they used them in the gold rush and in the late 1800s, and they're still using them. Powered a little different, but it's fascinating watching him coming up the river. He's avoiding the sandbars and gravel bars just the way we had to in the canoe. I don't know if it's visual or whether he's got a GPS, but anyway, they're still in use today. So we're camping on sandbars and gravel bars mostly now because the sides are too steep or too low and rugged to camp on. So on this sandbar tonight, this is crazy. It's just covered in fresh moose track. Rained heavy last night, so some of these are really fresh. We got a cow, and I think we got twin calves. So there's two sizes of calf tracks here. And I'm not sure, someone may correct me, but I believe that the North American moose is the fastest growing mammal in the world. So mid to late May, the calf is born, weighs 35 to 40 pounds. By hunting season in October, a male, a bull, a calf will weigh about 450 pounds, and a cow calf will weigh about 400 pounds. We've done it. We're coming up to the Klondike River, the confluence of the Klondike and the Yukon. And if it wasn't for the tributaries that held all the gold, Dawson City wouldn't have ever evolved. But we are about, well, I can see the buildings ahead. We are probably about 10 minutes from landing after 16 days on the river and 13 of them paddling. So you can see how clear the water coming out of the Klondike is compared to the silty water. So we can actually fill our water bag now and actually filter this water without it clogging all our filters. Again. Okay, paddle up. We've had numerous comments that our channel isn't showing up on people's feeds, and I'm not sure how YouTube's algorithm works. However, we produce videos weekly, and if you wish to see our content, we encourage you to press the notification bell.